Hey, everybody. This is the last June 2022 edition of the Pick Six podcast. I'm Evan Bland with Jimmy Watkins on Team Canada. If you're watching, he's got some Canada-themed sunglasses on today. We do not have our esteemed colleague, Sam McEwen. He is taking some much-deserved vacation, heading up to the Twin Cities, I believe, to hang out for a little bit. So you guys are stuck with us today. We're going to hit on a few topics. There's actually kind of a lot to parse through, even though it is June and the so-called offseason. We've got, a suspension to talk about. It's a big recruiting weekend coming up. We're fresh off the NBA draft. So there's a lot to get to. And Jimmy, you're going on vacation like after this, right? So like you're already kind of halfway there mentally.
Our boss is away. I'm leaving for vacation later this evening. Evan is not far behind me. This may be the last podcast we ever do, Evan. I am ready to spew profanities and spill industry secrets.
I figured you were just mentally checked out anyway, so this will be good. We'll get some more like honest sort of answers from you there.
Unfiltered. Do
you want to tease where you're going, or is that a state secret?
I feel like we already did. I mean, I'm wearing the Canadian sunglasses.
Okay.
I will be in Canada tomorrow for Canada Day, meeting up with a couple college buddies. And then I will be in Cleveland, Ohio for the 4th of July. One of my childhood friends has a backyard barbecue every year. It's one of my favorite days of the year, and I try to never miss it.
Get your passport all squared away and all that.
Yeah, you have to have like an app now. I had to upload my Vax card and passport and all that good stuff.
Okay. Nice. Well, like we said, it's been a year, man. And we talked about it a little off air, but like in our rhythms, it's a little different than a lot of sports writers because we have the College World Series. A lot of people in the industry around the country are able to take June off and or July if they want to before you get back into football and things like that. So we're coming off of the College World Series and we try to condense some of these vacations, into a little bit of a shorter window. Somebody else who is not going to be in action here in the near future is Nouredin Nouili.
Not quite a vacation, but yeah.
It's not a vacation, but we haven't talked about it on this pod yet. One of Nebraska's, I suppose you would say, projected starters on the interior of that offensive line announced here this month that he has a suspension for this year. He tested positive for a drug and won't be able to compete this year. Nebraska stands behind him. He's ready to come back in 2023. What do you suppose the level of impact is here, Jimmy, just in terms of how we look at that position and the outlook for Nebraska here this year?
Well, first we got to do the media guy thing and say that Nouredin Nouili is a good guy. That's kind of what anything something unfortunate happens to someone that we cover, we have to say he's good. He actually is a good guy. I mean it when I say that about Nouredin Nouili. He's one of the most generous Husker players with his time, and it's a bummer for him that this happened. But to me, this is just like really another thing. Like Nebraska already had the offensive line injuries in camp, and they already were working in a new blocking scheme and a new system. We knew that the combination was going to be shuffled around this year, regardless of whether Nouredin Nouili was in there or not. It just felt like to me that Nouredin was like the one thing that you could point to along the offensive line. Okay, that we know what that is going to look like. Like it's like a stability, a feeling of stability. Like Nouredin Nouili, interior offensive lineman, he's going to be there. And he's like, he was also like this cool, uplifting, worked up from a walk-on, and Nebraska loves its walk-ons. Evolved into a scholarship player last year, and now it's just one more thing that Donovan Raiola has to deal with in his first stint as a the head of an offensive line at this kind of level, and it's just. I keep saying on every radio appearance and podcast that I do, you tell me what the offensive line is going to look like, I will tell you what Nebraska's record is going to be next year. And that picture gets muddier and muddier every day, it seems. We do like a bunch of guys are going to be learning new positions in a new offense and a new blocking scheme during fall camp in the lead up to a trip to Ireland where a million things can go wrong, an unfamiliar setting to start off the season. It's just a lot of chaos for a program that could have really used a straight line off season, and particularly that position group.
Okay. So if you feel confident saying what you think Nebraska's record would be depending on the O-line, what if the O-line was left to right, Teddy Prohaska, Turner Corcoran, Trent Hickson, Brock Mando, Bryce Benhart? How are you feeling about that line?
I say I still don't know what that line looks like. I know those names. I know I could picture it. I could picture how they would stand up, but how will they perform together in those spots? I don't know. That's kind of what I'm saying here. Like we need to be able to project Nebraska, for Nebraska to be able to feel good about what its offense can do this year. You need to have confidence in what a baseline level, like a high floor kind of offensive line can look like. Like what is on an average day, how will that offensive line play? And it's impossible to know that when the names involved are in and out of the lineup and we're swapping starters around and guys are going to be maybe playing, like Turner Corcoran played mostly left tackle last season. He's probably not going to be playing left tackle this season. So we don't really know what that's going to look like. We like the center, whoever plays center is going to have limited experience starting at center, right? Like these are huge questions. Teddy Prohaska, we don't know what he's going to look like coming back from that knee. These are huge questions. Even last year with Teddy, like we saw him for a very brief stint. What we saw was very encouraging, but we didn't see it for very long. So again, so many question marks at a position that you just need to feel, you don't want to have to worry about, that you want to feel good about. That's not even to mention all the other new pieces that they have coming. There's a lot of reason. I think the offensive line would be, for me if I were a Nebraska fan, the biggest reason to be nervous about this season.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. The name that I kept thinking of after the Nouili news was Casey Rogers. And here's why. Like you think back when he transferred out on the defensive line, there was a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth that he was ready to be the guy and they were going to miss that production. And you dig into it a little bit and it's kind of a reminder that like he was a guy who was untouted, who was an okay defender, but not like a game changer. And when you lose a guy like that and you get the reaction that the fan base had, what it told me was like, man, the depth and the standard on that D line wasn't all that high. And nothing against, Rogers. I think he's going to be a solid player, but again, not like a game changer. And I think Nouili is sort of that same example where, yeah, he had some nice games down the stretch last year, but this isn't somebody to be confused with who's going to be, drafted highly or anything like that. And so when you lose that player and the reaction is, oh boy, what's going to happen to the offensive line? To me, that's more a reflection of what the O-line was with him than it was that player specifically. So I think that's a tough thing to look at. What's interesting about the line is like, unlike the defensive side, they actually have some depth there. You just don't know what it looks like. Does Kevin Williams slot in there? How do you feel about Brock Bando in his sixth year at Nebraska? Hunter Anthony, like you said, you don't really know. And then it's compounded by the fact that the guys who you do think will be starters weren't able to work together in the spring with the injuries to the guys that you mentioned. Benhart was ineffective at times last year. So and you have a new position coach. So what does that all look like and you have to roll out game one in a different country against a Big Ten West opponent? So you don't even have the chance or the luxury to sort of ease into it against some non-conference teams at home. So is it fair would you say, Jimmy, when you talk about position concerns, is O-line at the top?
100%. And I think you made a good point there by pointing out that Nouredin Nouili is not Quentin Nelson. Like, this is not somebody that is going to be a huge, like, he's not going to make or break your offensive line, that kind of talent. He's a replaceable piece. But as you mentioned, like, when you have so many moving parts, it's just so comforting to be able to point at something and say known quantity. Like, we know what we can get out of this guy. We have tape on him. He's been in our system. He's started. He can bring along other guys. That just feels so good to be able to say that. Now they can't say that, and now we just have all these questions. Again, doesn't necessarily mean that the sky is falling and that Nouredin Nouili is irreplaceable in the left guard position or whatever, right guard, whichever position he was going to play is going to be a disaster now. It's just another question, another thing on Donovan Raiola's plate. He may need to go back for a second plate at this point, because there's just so much going on with that position group.
You know what's interesting though? Like, I was just thinking about this too with that news. It's actually been a pretty quiet offseason for Nebraska football, other than this little piece of news. I mean, you think about last year when we were talking about Nebraska trying to duck Oklahoma, and 2 years ago, of course, it was the pandemic and different things, and like, we haven't really heard from Scott Frost since the spring game. You get a handful of player interviews that sort of trickle out, but there hasn't been anything controversial or anything like that. So I don't know. It feels too maybe like this piece of news is a little bit weightier just because it's the first thing that we've seen this year, that maybe you kind of think negatively upon with the team.
It is that point in the off season, right? Like, we could have, if Nouredin Nouili stubbed his toe, we probably would have been talking about that. When you wrote about Casey Thompson, still being on a pitch count in the middle of the summer a couple weeks ago, like, that was a question that people were talking about on radio shows for the next week and a half too. It's that point in the offseason. That's part of this too. Like, we are in the content business. We haven't had a lot of actual stuff to talk about with football, which I personally think is a good thing. No news is good news during the offseason. Like, just put your head down, lift some weights, and get in shape, throw routes on air, that sort of stuff. That's good. I think that's all positive. Neutral is good. But now we have this, and that's not so good.
Right. So let's expand this a little bit. And this is not, official record prediction week or anything like that. That'll be in a couple months, and Sam will be here for that too. But like, as we sit here on June 30th, and we're essentially 2 months out from Ireland, like, what's your range of outcomes for this season? Best case scenario, worst case scenario, like, how wide are you willing to go with possibilities for this team?
Whew. Pretty wide. Pretty wide is where I'll start there. I think on the low end, if we're trying to envision, let's say, what like a 5-7, we're changing coaches type situation looks like, I could see the offensive line being messy as it was last year. And I don't think it would necessarily even be Donovan Raiola's fault if that happened, because as we just spent a bunch of time talking about, there's a lot going on, and he has not that much time to get these guys some live reps and get situated. And I think the beginning of this is, maybe it probably behooves us to say this to push our content out that's coming up ahead of the Ireland stuff. But I truly believe that how they start the season is going to be super important and predictive on how it goes going forward. Just because I keep thinking about Scott Frost after games last year saying out loud that the team was like sort of expecting the other shoe to drop at times. Like the anxiety that fans feel when Nebraska is up by 3 points in the third quarter seems to have bled over into that locker room. And there's a lot of new faces in there, which can help sort of get that feeling out of there. But if you stumble out of the gate against Northwestern, or you lose ugly against Oklahoma, that doubt can creep in really fast. So I think I could see a scenario where they stumble out maybe they lose, some of those Big Ten West games, or, the Rutgers, Indiana situation that that a lot of people, the optimistic people, are thinking, hey, W. You stumble there, that could trip you up down that back half of the schedule where it gets pretty tough. On the high end, I think there's a lot of talent here. I love the Mark Whipple. I think Whipple can do so much. We talked about Donovan Raiola, the microscope's on him right now to fix that offensive line. I think Whipple can do a lot to help that offensive line just by implementing more quick game passing stuff, more play action, keeping defenses on their toes. It doesn't have to be a dominant offensive line. It just, you can scheme around and be okay enough to let the passing game work and open up holes for the run game. And if you can do that, I really think there are 7 or 8 wins on the schedule. And this is also assuming that Eric Chenander, who I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt to be able to do this, can just sort of string together a defense that's sort of similar to what we've been seeing from Nebraska. They can take away deep passes. They can do enough to stop the run and keep the defense off the field in a timely manner. I think there are 8 wins on the schedule, like 8 very winnable games. I'm not in 9-10 land yet. I've heard people drunk on the recruiting momentum and, all this talk about transfers, and Mickey Joseph's a great salesman talking about, why can't we beat Oklahoma? I would say slow your roll on some of that stuff, but 8 wins, super doable. 5 to 8, that's my range.
5 to 8. Okay. See, I'm gonna even widen that more. Like I feel like it's 4 to 9, and I'll give you the four scenario. I think in the 4, you better count on beating North Dakota, Georgia Southern at home, and probably those 2 teams that Nebraska brings onto their schedule from the east side, in Indiana and Rutgers. But I think in the 4-win scenario, there would be a lot of close losses again, kind of like they had last year. Maybe whether that's momentum or that lack of continuity sort of catching up to them, maybe injuries. The other thing about what could go wrong, of course, is things don't coalesce, right? The Whipple-Frost marriage maybe is uneven. The O-line doesn't protect, and so whatever they call doesn't work as well. And then things kind of snowball toward the end, where the second half of that schedule is really rough. I could see it. I think 4 and 8's a possibility, because we haven't seen more than 5 wins from this team, in a long time. So I think that's possible on the one hand. On the other side, you go to Northwestern, which was not a good team last year. You go to Ireland to play Northwestern, which was not a good team last year. You take care of your other home games leading up to Oklahoma. You handle Indiana and Rutgers. And I think we've seen over the last few years examples of teams that maybe, because they get some positive momentum early, start playing ahead of their skis a little bit. I always think of 2019 Minnesota as that team. I mean, they had some close wins early on, and then they sort of just believed and settled in and took off. And I think that's what Scott Frost has said over the years when he says, man, we just need a little wind in our sails. To me, that's what that is. Like, have some kind of momentum to start, get that thing going, and then you can figure it out. I agree with you that, like, the Whipple factor is real. Even if they're passing it a little bit more and running it with the quarterback less, what does that look like? But to get to 9, you're saying Nebraska has to win all the games that it's favored in, and it's going to have to beat one of Oklahoma, Michigan, Wisconsin, or Iowa. And so again, I think, is it possible? Sure, it's possible, but that would be the high end of it for me there. And I think the other part is, what's cost Nebraska in the past. A lot of it's been special teams. Well, okay, they have a new kicker, they have a new punter that they feel pretty good about. It's been, turnovers, especially from the quarterback position. Well, they have a new guy, whether that's Casey Thompson or somebody else. So that to me is really fascinating, because I feel like, maybe you don't agree, but I feel like Nebraska's got about as wide of a range of any college football team out there this year.
I hadn't thought about it that way, but yeah, you're probably right. You're probably right, just because they have this new injection of talent and they were, as you know, allegedly very close last year. And if you inject the new talent the correct way, maybe that pushes you over the edge and swings, 3 or 4 of those outcomes. But at the same time, all that newness is really hard to get fixed in the right direction when you're on a short, weird schedule. Like the spring was earlier, the fall camp schedule's a little bit off, their body clock's going to be off. I was talking during the College World Series, I was in the press box with Tom Chattel, the World-Herald columnist, if you don't know, and Gary Sharp from 1620 The Zone. And it hadn't dawned on me, but they're going to come back and play North Dakota like 7 days after coming back from Ireland. I don't know how long it takes your body to adjust from jet lag, but I could envision a very anxious 9-6 halftime score of that game, just because weirdness coming back off of a long road trip, and they're going to put a lot of stock into that Northwestern game. That's just an aside. I wanted to ask you though, since I kind of brought it up earlier and you wrote this story, Casey Thompson's thumb, thing, not a thing? It's been a long time since he injured that thumb for him to still be on a pitch count. It could be a precautionary thing, but I just, you talk to the man. So what do you think?
Right. I mean, to me, it's not that big of a thing. I mean, it's I suppose it's a small thing. And what he had said was, ever since the spring game, when he just played, what was it, 2 or 3 series, they put him back on that pitch count. So typically he likes to throw the ball 5, 6, maybe even every day, meet with receivers, work on chemistry, things like that. And Nebraska has wanted him to hold off. And, I can see how there's that would raise some red flags, considering that was an injury he suffered more than 8 months ago against Oklahoma when he was with Texas. And if you saw pictures of his hand at that time, like when you think of like thumb injury or sprained thumb or whatever, it doesn't sound that bad, but like it was pretty mangled, and he couldn't grip the ball at that time. And it affected his performance the rest of the year. And it affected perception of him as a quarterback. And a lot of it was based, again, on the fact that he couldn't grip it with his throwing hand. And so, he came back in the spring, felt like he did pretty well. I think some of the behind the scenes numbers that he had in practice were pretty high. And to hear him explain it, and I think this is accurate, is that it was more of a precautionary thing. And to say that, why do we need to be pushing this thing in May and June when you can rest it up, and fall camp's going to be starting here at the end of July. Things will be ramping up at that point. It's a wear and tear sort of deal anyway. So I don't think that it's going to be something that lingers into the season. And maybe the reason that it doesn't is because they're playing it safe right now.
In an ideal world, we wouldn't be having to consider it at all, right? Like that's the only reason I bring it up, just because, like you said, it has been 8 months, and I don't know. I'm no doctor, nothing close to it. I'm just a man wearing Canadian shades. And I just don't like hearing that that's still a thing, particularly because, as you said, it affected him. And I remember in that Kansas game, like just some dirt balls that probably wouldn't have been otherwise been dirt balls. And right. that just kind of freaks me out a little bit. That's all.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see as we get closer to it. And he's still not the official number one, right? I mean, Chubba Purdy and Logan Smothers are still sort of hanging out there. Nebraska decided not to name anybody after the spring. So I think he'll be okay. His demeanor is really interesting. I'm going to have a feature on him later this summer, but he is absolutely keyed in, like zeroed in on the playbook and on learning everything and being as knowledgeable as the coaches. So it's hard to say if he's that much different than Adrian Martinez in that sense, but just the way he carries himself and his personality is much more like, I'm going to do this. Whereas I think Adrian was a little more relaxed, maybe a little more, at least outwardly, humble toward it. So it'll be really interesting, I think, to see what that new dynamic is moving forward. Another thing we wanted to hit on, it's going to be a busy recruiting weekend. It was a busy recruiting month for Nebraska. I mean, they had 4 or 5 official visit recruiting weekends, multiple Friday night light camps, position camps. And before I'll get into it here with some of the guys that we should be watching here this weekend, Jimmy, but I guess just generally, like, what was your impression of their recruiting push? How much did you think it was noteworthy just for how you view the program going forward? What did you see?
I'm of two minds here, because on the one hand, okay, so let's start with a reality that we all can you hear this trash truck in the background? I don't know. They're taking the dumpster out right now. Apologize if people can hear that. A reality that we all can accept. Nebraska has positive recruiting momentum right now. They're signing good players. Maverick Noonan is a huge in-state get for them. The new guys are clearly doing what they were hired to do. Your Bill Bushes, your Mickey Josephs, your Brian Applewhites. Thumbs up on those fronts so far. Does that matter right now in the summer of 2022 when we're facing a season that could end in all of those guys having a new job next year? I think yes and no. Yes, because to a certain extent, perception is all that matters in recruiting. You're selling a vision of something that doesn't exist yet, right? Like, this is, 2023, 2024 kids, the guys that they're going to be peaking with at Nebraska, usually takes 2 to 3 years, are not all on the team yet. So Mickey Joseph's braggadocio, sales ability, the way that he can spin a tale, the way, him telling the story about him not getting off the phone with Jamar Chase all night when he was at LSU, that's cool. That matters. It helps land recruits 100%. But that momentum can be sapped real quick if we hit the low end of the outcomes that we were talking about earlier. If it's 4 or 5 wins and we're changing coaches at the end of the season. So I don't really know how to feel about it, I guess, is the conclusion I'm coming to here. But it's not nothing. Like, it matters that they're able to do this, particularly coming off of a season where, yeah, they're close, but like, I don't know how much people really want to hear that. It's just like, you won 3 games, and at a certain point, it might say a little bit more about you than luck that you keep losing all those close games. So I've made this point before on the podcast. It's super impressive that they've been able to build this momentum, given that they didn't have a ton to build off of. But how much this momentum matters going forward is super TBD.
And let's, big picture this thing right now. The class of 2023, for all of its players that it has landed, 10 commits, it's 38th nationally, but it's also 11th in the Big Ten. So even with all that, Nebraska is playing from behind here, and which isn't all that unusual. They tend to get a lot of their players toward the end of the cycle anyway. But it does sort of underscore the fact that what they've done, while maybe there's some momentum in the perception, there's a lot to do still. And so let's break it down real quick. So they've had right around 30 official visitors from late May until now. 10 of those have been or are committed to Nebraska since that point. 5 others have committed elsewhere. So what you're talking about is about 15 official visitors who have come to Nebraska in the last 4 to 6 weeks and are uncommitted still. And so if you've been on social media or follow the program, you're probably aware that there are some decisions coming pretty soon. And so to me, I kind of break down those 15 guys into 3 categories. There's your long shots. There's your ones to watch, guys who have Nebraska squarely in the mix. And then there are guys you really just don't know. You don't know their timelines. They don't do a lot of interviews. And so it's hard to gauge. But in terms of timeliness, a couple guys this weekend who I think Nebraska would be a long shot for, a couple offensive linemen. There's Amir Herring, who has visited. He's considered a Michigan lean. He's going to decide on June 7th. And then probably a name that more recruiting diehards are aware of is Caden Green, who is a 4-star tackle. He's going to decide July 8th, and he's widely considered an Oklahoma lean at this point. So we'll see. But maybe a little bit more imminently, I think a few names to watch that very much could end up being Huskers here in the near future. You've got Dylan Rogers, who's an edge rusher out of the Houston area. He was a visitor here. Colorado, Houston, K-State, Missouri are the other teams that he's been looking at. I think it's pretty likely that we hear his decision. Very likely Nebraska here in the near future. You've got a wide receiver out of Atlanta named Barry Jackson. He's deciding on Saturday. And again, I think a situation where Nebraska is probably the favorite. Mississippi State, Louisville, Memphis, some of those other teams. You want a toss-up name, Dontavius Braswell, running back from Georgia as well. He's deciding Saturday, and there's really not a lot of consensus. He doesn't do interviews. He announced a Final Four of Alabama, Oregon, Boston College, and Nebraska. And so what was interesting about Braswell is his first offer was the Huskers last November. And so there's often a lot of weight in kind of being that first program to identify somebody. Really fast kid, was a sprint track state champion in May. And then I'll just give you a couple other ones here quick, Jimmy. Omarion Miller, a receiver from Louisiana. You talk about the Mickey Joseph effect. This is a guy who was an LSU commit who I think from what we saw at Friday Night Lights, very much connected with the coaches and some of the other prospects. Junior Sia, an offensive lineman from Utah, has been in. It's possible that he could be someone in the near future. And then, of course, everybody knows about Malachi Coleman out of Lincoln East, who Nebraska likes as a receiver, some schools like as a defensive lineman. He took some other trips as well. He's been to Michigan and Oklahoma, has a lot of schools after him too. So it should be a busy few weeks here, but kind of like you said, like it's an interesting time because fans have been so burned by like the next big recruits not panning out that you kind of take it with a grain of salt. And then you throw on top of that the fact that we're in the transfer portal era and guys leave after a year or two, guys come in after a year or two. So even when you don't hit on some of these guys, there's often like this sentiment of, well, okay, we'll get him the second time around when he doesn't play it wherever he ends up committing. So it's a really unique and different sort of vibe than we've ever had.
It's kind of like, so I have a friend named Kevin that I went to Ohio University with, go Bobcats. And the recruiting thing with the transfer portal to me is like Kevin's in like 7 different fantasy leagues and big sports gambling guy. And so I end up asking him every year, like, do you even feel anything when you watch football anymore? It's like this team scored. Oh no. Oh yeah. Interception. Oh no. Oh yeah. And with the recruiting stuff, it's like, okay, well, this guy committed here, but like, can I get excited about that? How long do I have to wait before this guy is in the transfer portal? And on the other end of it, it's like, oh man, he didn't choose us, but he might choose us again in 2 years. Kind of a similar deal here. It's a weird, I don't think fans are still figuring out how to sort out those emotions.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's, I think what shows that the perception is still catching up to the reality is the reaction anytime somebody transfers, because it's still like 2018, 2017 thinking of like, oh, this is a huge indictment on the program, as opposed to this is kind of business as usual now. So yeah, I think that part's really interesting. All right, let's transition here. Last topic, hoops. Bryce McGowens was drafted, but so I think anyone who is watching this is aware of that fact at this point. The way I want to frame it to you though, Jimmy, was the Bryce McGowens experience worth it? If Nebraska could go back again and they knew that the outcome would be a losing season, but they got a 5-star. They elevated that 5-star into the NBA. Would they do it again? Was it worth it?
Was the Bryce McGowens experience worth it? I still think yes. I think any time you are a program that has literally, in this case, never had that kind of talent, you got to take a chance on it. Even if you know it's not going to work, coaches are first of all, coaches are what's the word I'm looking for? They don't live in reality all the time. They are infinitely self-confident in their ability to get the most. So even if I told Fred Hoiberg what was going to happen with Bryce McGowan, they're going to win 10 games, he probably wouldn't have believed me anyways. Like even if I came from the future. So coaches are delusional that way. That's the word I was looking for, a D word. Was the Bryce McGowan experiment, whatever, successful? I don't think you could say yes. In any way, shape, or form. That sounds harsh, but it did not translate to wins. They did not really elevate Bryce's draft stock. I don't know why I'm tiptoeing around that. They didn't. When he arrived on campus, he was mocked to go like late teens, early 20s. He ended up going 40th. There are a variety of reasons why that happened. And like I talked to Bryce's dad yesterday about this, and he was saying that, you know, there were a bunch of teams that were really interested in Bryce that ended up making other trades that, you know, took them out of Bryce range. For example, Memphis is a team that apparently had very high interest in Bryce. Bryce's family knows Ja Morant's family. There's a connection there, but Memphis made, you know, a 2-for-1 trade on draft night, and that took him out of Bryce range for a little while. And not all the way though, because then they ended up taking David Roddy in the 20s, which is where Bryce would have been. So take that with a grain of salt. The Bryce thing, I guess what I need to ask here is like, what is it? Was it worth? What was it worth? What are we like? Was the Bryce thing worth it? What is it?
I guess what I mean is like, I think there's a perception out there that Nebraska cost itself wins and actively hurt the team by bringing in a player that they could showcase and elevate when maybe he didn't fit in as a defender or fit in to the flow of the offense. Like it sacrificed team success for individual success so they could say, hey, we got a guy to the league. And do you think that experience was worth it?
Valid criticism. Bryce has a long way to go on defense. That's my biggest question about him as an NBA player going forward. He couldn't. The thing that's tricky is that he absolutely contributed to the ball stoppy culture that they had on offense. He took way too many, deep step back threes when he was for a guy who shot 27%, even if he shot 35% during the back half of the season or whatever, the nice stretch that he had during Big Ten play. But I don't you can't attribute that all to him. I don't think. I do think that when Kobe Webster was talking about accountability, remember on the radio show, I think Bryce probably could have been a part of that, because Bryce, they're trying to uphold him and make sure that he has a good experience, because they want him to tell the other guys of his ilk that, hey, I had a great time here. So I don't know that Bryce is the primary reason that some of the stuff went sideways. So I kind of land in the middle on this one again, where I think they'd take Bryce again in a heartbeat, or another guy like him, but it definitely didn't work out in my opinion, either party. Bryce got a bunch of on-ball reps at Nebraska that okay, so let's back it up a little bit. Bryce started out as a commit to Florida State, right? Decommitted, went to Nebraska. What Florida State does with guys like Bryce, they've done this with a ton of guys with a number of guys who got picked in top 10. They will have guys of his ilk come off the bench. And there's, there's always like a joke about some Florida State kid who's supposed to go in the lottery. And it's like, but he came off the bench. It's like, okay, it's what they do. They're really good. Leonard Hamilton wins games. Don't question him. He traded that life. Maybe that would have been his life. Maybe it wouldn't have been, but he traded Florida State for Nebraska, where I know for a fact Nebraska put the ball in his hands more than he probably would have had it in his hands at other programs. Yeah. And the idea behind that is like, hey, look at NBA teams. I have the ball in my hands. This is what you want, your star players to do. Have the ball in your hands, run pick and rolls, a spaced floor. Let me create for others, that sort of thing. I actually think that Bryce had an underrated season as a passer. I don't think he was as willing to pass as he needed to be all the time, but when he did, he threw some really impressive passes. That's neither here nor there. But the result was NBA teams looked at that tape and they said, nope. They said, we're going to wait. We're going to pass on you. We like these other guys better. Again, a lot of reasons why Bryce dropped. I'm not saying that, he should have been the 40th pick, but he was the 40th pick. That's the outcome that we have to work with. And given that outcome, I don't think it worked out for either party.
Yeah. I mean, and you talk about like what he put on tape, like they're not, and maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think that NBA teams are drafting him for anything close to the role that he had at Nebraska, right? They don't want him to be a dominant on-ball scorer. They want more of a complementary role, right? Like that feels like that would be his role if he were to carve out one in the NBA. And maybe that's why the Florida State experience would have gone better for him. But I just don't know, based on how much Nebraska asked him to do, that was something that's going to confirm to NBA executives that, yeah, this is the guy that we want on our team.
It's really tricky because Bryce as an NBA guy to me is like 2 or 3 years away. Like in Charlotte, he may well get an opportunity to play sooner rather than later, especially because I don't know if you saw this, Evan, Miles Bridges, who is like their most important wing guy right now, young guy out of Michigan State, up for a contract extension. I think he's a restricted free agent this offseason, was arrested for domestic violence last night, the day before free agency starts. So Bryce's timeline may be accelerated because of a thing like that. But it's just hard to project. I do think at some point in his career, he can be, a second or third option as an offensive guy, like a guy who could have the ball in his hands and score. So I think that there is value to those reps. It's just that you have to look so far past the immediate picture that you're seeing when you're watching those clips, because he has such a long way to go and he's so young. The other thing, I guess real quick, we did talk to Fred and new North Dakota State transfer Sam Griezel this week, and the basketball program announced that Sam had hip surgery in March, which is, they all say is fine right now. I personally, again, not a doctor, just a guy wearing Canadian shades, real worried anytime someone starts talking about hip stuff. We'll see how that unfolds going forward. But we were talking about the ball stoppy stuff, the ugliness that was Nebraska basketball's offense last year. Early returns, all the caveats. It's freaking June 30th. They haven't even really had much live stuff yet. They've mostly been doing walkthroughs and installs. The vibes are good so far. Like people are praising each other. We're praising Emmanuel Bandemal is one of the greatest talkers Fred Hoiberg has ever been around. He's so positive and uplifting. And Sam Griezel's this great, he's out with the hip, but he's this great leader. And they're not even worried about him having to pick up the offense with an injured hip this summer, because he's seen everything. He's been to the NCAA tournament, and Juwan Gary, fans are going to love Juwan Gary, Evan. Fred says they're going to love Juwan Gary. He plays so hard. The freshmen are coming along so well. Blaze Keita is a physical presence. At that part, I 100% believe Blaze is a beast physically. He's going to hurt people. But Ramel Lloyd and Jamarcus Lawrence are talking more every day. Like it's that kind of vibe right now. It's that kind of vibe. I wasn't here for this time last year, this time last year, they didn't even have Alonzo Verge yet. So we're on a different timeline. That's another thing that people are excited about. It's like, hey, normalcy. We have our team now. That's great. But yeah, that was my takeaway. Immaculate vibes midway through summer workouts.
Well, it's funny what winning will do. If you win the games, your team's awfully likable. If you don't, then there's a lot of flaws and a lot of discord. So if they can find, like, I feel like that's been the middle ground Nebraska's trying to find, because obviously you want to have all the best players and you want to dominate. But if you had to choose between one or two really good players and you lose versus a bunch of kind of so-so players that don't have pro prospects but you win, I think fans would take the latter one. So maybe this team has a little bit more of that than what last year did. Is that possible? Fair to say? I
actually, for the most part, buy this chemistry stuff. I think this team is going to get along better than past teams. Losing could hamper that a little bit. But for the most part, I think that the chemistry is going to be pretty strong. The guys are going to do what the coaches ask them to do. My question is, how far can chemistry get you? Like, this team, for all the good leadership they have, I still think last year's team was significantly more talented. And I know Nebraska basketball fans are sick and tired of hearing the word talent being thrown about that program during the Fred Hoiberg era, but talent matters still, you know. Indiana has a top 10 recruiting class. Ohio State had a top 10 recruiting class. Illinois might have had the best transfer haul of any team in college basketball. So that stuff still matters. Chemistry is great. It's awesome that, you know, Manuel Banamel is communicating. It's awesome that Blaze's physical presence. It's awesome that Sam Griezel is maintaining a presence around practice, and, you know, they're hanging out and whatever. Can you make shots? Can you stop the other guy from getting in front of you? These are the questions that we still need to answer.
Yeah, the talent versus chemistry thing, I think, is exactly the way to frame it, because to me, talent gives you the higher ceiling, but chemistry gives you the higher floor. And we saw last year that Nebraska, maybe it was more talented, but the bottom dropped out when the chemistry wasn't there. So, like, finding that mix, man, it's hard. It's been a long time since Nebraska's had it.
Yeah. They figured it out for a week at the end, though. That's crazy. If my bingo card is left unfilled because nobody mentioned on Monday that they had this great momentum from the end of the regular season last year. I'm disappointed. I want to hear more about the 3-point avalanche against Penn State and Bryce's awesome game against Ohio State, and what the Wisconsin win, going into Wisconsin on the road, Evan, when they could have clinched a Big Ten title. Come on, that's galvanizing. I need to hear more about it.
There you go. Well, we will in the coming weeks. It's coming back. Football's coming back. But first, a little bit of vacation. So we're going to be doing that. We'll probably be back, I think, in a couple weeks. That's probably fair to say. Back rocking and rolling. There's going to be a lot more recruiting news at that point. We'll be on the precipice of camp, fall football camp. And then here we go. It's going to be a lot of fun, man. It's been about a year for you here, right? Like, it's
coming up.
We got the 1 year Annie here. So
I'll be bringing a cake.
Good. Well, we'll be back in a couple weeks with Sam, rested, rejuvenated, for your listening and reading pleasure. Until then, enjoy some time away. Thanks for listening.